Today is a Palm Sunday. It marks the beginning of Holy Week, the day in which millions ritually recreate God's palm waving parade in Jerusalem, shortly before his execution. This is the most important week of the Christian year, as it moves from triumphal entry to crucifixion and death to empty tomb. We will read two gospel lessons this morning. One is about the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, and the other about the passion of Christ. When Passover was just a few days away, Jesus turned his face and headed to Jerusalem. He continued to teach and heal and draw a crowd. He tells the disciples that he will suffer and die when he reaches the city, and then will rise again. They have no idea what he means. As he approaches Jericho, he hears a beggar, and then dying with Zacchaeus, a wealthy man and chief tax collector, hated by people. Then, when he was near Jerusalem, Jesus goes on to tell the parable of the talents, where a noble man rewards his slaves who multiply the gifts he had given them, but punished the slaves who buried his gift in the ground. Then after this parable, he went on ahead, going up to the Jerusalem. Jerusalem would have been filled with lots of travelers. Jesus makes an entrance into the holy city on the first day of the last week of his life. When he had come near Bethphage and Bethany, at the place called the Mount of Olives, he sent two of the disciples, saying, "Go into the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you will find tied there a colt that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, 'Why are you untying it?' just say this: 'The Lord needs it.'" In all three synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus sends two of his disciples into Jerusalem to find a colt for him to ride into Jerusalem on. Jesus knows ahead of time where the colt will be and what the response of the owner will be. What would you have said if you were one of the disciples Jesus sent to go and get a colt? Why do you think Jesus arranged this triumphal entry? This morning, we should remember that God is directing what is happening. From the Jesus incarnation to the death on the cross, God is not vulnerable to fate or chance. God does not suffer by accident or unwillingly. and God puts all things into his purposes. Jesus was following an intentional plan. He was not simply the victim of the events that followed. He was acting deliberately. Jesus was going to Jerusalem intentionally, knowing that he was to die there. Jesus knows everything that will happen, the kind of animal he will ride on, and how to answer in order to hand it over. The Lord needs it. Jesus arranged for a court which no one has ever ridden. The unridden court symbolizes purity and peace. When he went along, people spread their cloaks on the road. When he came near the place where the road goes down the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began to joyfully praise God in loud voices for all the miracles they had seen. They shouted, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest." At this point, we are confused to see the people who are shouting joyfully to praise Jesus are the very people who would shout to kill Jesus on the cross later. Anyway, for now, they are swept up in the glory and majesty of Christ. On hearing the praises for King Jesus, some of the Pharisees immediately tell Jesus to tell the people to be quiet. Superficially, they don't want the peace of Jerusalem to be at risk. The Pharisees might recognize the Romans have given a kind of peace to Jewish people. But if the Romans fear any political threat, then the peace will be broken. Of course, the peace the Pharisees are worried about losing is not a true peace. It is a peace rooted in fear. It is not the kind of peace that Jesus has brought to this world. The peace that tries to keep things status quo for the sake of the power's interest. Jesus answers them, "I tell you, if these were silent, the stones would shout out." Jesus implies the Pharisees who are living things cannot recognize life. And ironically, it is the lifeless stones that will not keep quiet about the life and power they see embodied in Jesus Christ. In other words, God's creation will worship. Sometimes fear keeps us from stepping away from our rigidness and keeps us from being able to see the goodness of the Lord and to worship. Sometimes fear keeps us from doing justice. We can see the good example from the Pontius Pilate. He was overpowered by the chief priests and the crowds shouting to kill Jesus on the cross. So he deliberately released into society a man who was a murderer and rebel. At the same time, he executed a man that he had 3 times publicly pronounced not guilty, and whom he knew to be innocent. It is not easy for us, human beings, to see God's way of peace and justice. It is perhaps even more difficult for us to be able to identify the powerful force of false peace and justice present and at work in and around us. Nevertheless, the purpose of God will be fulfilled. The only question is, will we join in or get out of the way? It's time, says Jesus as he sits on the humble little court. It is time for events to unfold. Events that can gather us up and carry us to a new reality, a new way of life, a new peace and a new hope. This morning, Jesus tells us to say, the Lord needs it. Amen.